Welcome to another edition of Drugs, Crime, and Politics, brought to you by the Texas Drug Policy Forum, the Drug Policy Forum of Texas. I'm Buford Terrell, Professor of Law at South Texas College of Law, and I'm your host tonight with Bindu Nair, although tonight we're going to treat Bindu more as a guest for a short period of time. Our other guest tonight is a candidate for the State House of Representatives, Mark McDavid. We'll be joining him in a few minutes, but first there are a couple of things that have happened since our last show that you should be informed of. Probably the most important is that the UCLA School of Medicine, which is one of the premier lung institutes in the world, has released a new study. This study involved several tens of thousands of patients. And what this study found is that compared to non-marijuana smoking patients, those who used marijuana, even using it heavily, had no higher incidence of lung cancer, and actually their rate of lung cancer was slightly less than that of the non-users. Now, this is a pretty clear and definitive study, but what makes it most important is that the lead researcher on it has been the mainstay of the anti-marijuana campaigners for over 30 years, because he's the one who meticulously showed that marijuana contains the same chemicals that cigarettes contain, and is the source of all of the quotes that have said cigarettes cause lung cancer, marijuana contains the same chemicals, therefore marijuana should cause lung cancer. Well, it now turns out that the same man's research shows that it doesn't do so. Be interesting to see if they continue to quote him as proof that marijuana is dangerous. Now, Bindu,
that kind of reminds me of when the ecstasy studies of how all the information came out on MDMA that it causes holes in your brain, and then later they had to retract that in Science Journal that it was in fact a different drug entirely. It was methamphetamines. So,
hello, caller.
Hi, this is Dean Becker.
Oh, hi, Dean.
Hello, Buford. Glad to get a chance to talk with you and your audience. Had a couple of stories I wanted to talk about this week.
Okay.
Probably ones that you've got in mind already, but last week the Washington Post, a couple other major newspapers came out with a story that shows a recent study finds no cancer-marijuana connection. That's per Donald Tashkin, University of California at Los Angeles. He's a guy who for many years was touting the government line, so to speak, thinking that marijuana probably did, in fact, lead to cancer.
Yeah, we were just discussing that, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. I'm sorry. I don't have access to the channel at the moment. But the point being, I guess, then, that once again we've shown that the reefer madness survives, and even the government scientists are beginning to discount it. Another recent story came out in the New York Times. This is from just a few days ago. I think it was on the weekend. Springtime for killing in Afghanistan. And they're talking about the fact that, once again, bumper crop might not be a record crop, may have come down from the prior year a bit, but Afghanistan has shown itself once again to be the world's #1 producer of opium and heroin. And it's once again evidence that our policy is a failure, just as it has been in Colombia, despite the fact that with record amounts of Roundup sprayed on the mountainsides, the amount of coca being grown has actually gone up, despite the U.S. expenditure of some several $billion in trying to prevent it from growing there.
It's really been in a sense, almost amusing to look through history and notice how the coca production shifts from Colombia to Bolivia to Peru to Colombia, depending upon where the pressures are at the moment.
Well, exactly right. And I just last week I had Gustavo de Grief, the former Attorney General of Colombia, as my guest on one of my radio programs, and we talked about that fact. And then also there's another balloon effect. The pressure applied in Colombia has also, if you will, squeezed most of the violence up towards Mexico, where now Nuevo Laredo has about 1 killing per day in the turf war between the two ongoing Mexican cartels over who will control the supply of drugs coming into the United States. It's, I guess once again proving that you just cannot squelch this multi-billion-dollar industry. You can arrest all the drug kingpins like Gustavo de Grief did, the man who busted Mr. Pablo Escobar, the man who fractured the Medellin cartel, is now a member of law enforcement against prohibition and calling for the end of prohibition. Wanted to also point out that this week on the Cultural Baggage Show, our guest will be Eddie Ellison, a man with 30 years experience working for Scotland Yard, who has now come to the conclusion that we must end prohibition as well. And we'll also be hearing from Dr. Peter Roston. He's the former vice president of Pfizer in Pharmaceutical House, and he will also be our guest on the Century of Lies program this week. I think proving once again there is just absolutely no justification for this drug war. I urge folks to tune in if they get the chance to KPFT Radio, which is 90.1 FM, or they can listen online at drugtruth.net. And as always, Buford, I commend you guys for your good work and for sharing the truth with your viewers.
Thank you, Dean. And before you go, I've got one question.
Sure.
You were mentioning the gentleman from Scotland Yard. Does this mean that LEAP has now become an international organization?
Oh, they are indeed now. There are members on the European continent. It has been predominantly a North American organization with, again, predominantly United States citizens, several Canadians, but they have now branched off to, as we say, to the UK, and Eddie Ellison, former member of Scotland Yard, and as I mentioned earlier, Gustavo de Grief, former Attorney General of Colombia, is now on the board of directors of LEAP.
Thank you. And we will see you on the radio, Dean.
Thank you, sir. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, they're one of the most credible organizations out there because they are all former police officers and DEA agents and everything of such. So.
Well, what's been going on in your life lately?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Buford, because it's been pretty busy for Bayou City Compassion. We have the Hinchy-Rohrabacher Amendment. The vote is coming up in June, and it may be pushed to July. And that's been the main focus, especially on Representative Culberson, whom we've kind of been targeting. Our previous target was Tom DeLay, but he kind of dropped out.
And what does that amendment do?
Well, the Hinchy-Rohrabacher Amendment basically would prevent federal funds for prosecuting patients in states that have legalized medical marijuana, in the 12 states that have done so. And so it's not saying that it's going to create any more laws, it's just going to cut funding for those federal agencies that really don't have jurisdiction in those states that have already, and I guess that's kind of the debate. That's where the Raich versus Ashcroft decision came in. But it would essentially not prevent federal funds from being allocated to hurt these agencies that have already established a patient ID system, have already patients who have already had physicians' recommendations, and have already been through an entire system set up for that state, have already had a ballot initiative and everything. So I believe Maurice Hinchy of New York and something Rohrabacher of California authored this and have pushed it into the House legislation for every legislative session. So far, 161 members of the House of Representatives have voted for it, and we're trying to get as many people to vote for it as possible. It really is a states' rights issue. So we actually went to Representative Culberson's town hall meeting and asked him about it. And I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but we recorded his statement, and he said that he believes it's a states' rights issue, like most Republicans would say. So he believes it's a states' rights issue following the 10th Amendment, and yet he continues to vote against it. So we went to his office and asked him the same thing, and once again he said he would vote against it, but he also said he would support something that supports a broader language, and that may have, something that's a federal medical marijuana program. So we'd basically like to get as many people out there who are concerned about this and are concerned about either states' rights or, medical marijuana in the future. I mean, I don't have to expound here and sit here and waste the time to tell how many people how beneficial it can be, how many studies have been done. If you'd like to know, you can check out BayouCityCompassion.org or TexansForMedicalMarijuana.org. Especially at Bayou City Compassion's website, we have pre-written letters which you can send off to your representatives. We have a list of your representatives, their addresses, their phone numbers, how you can get into contact with them. And that's just the easiest way to get involved in the political process, other than voting. So.
Okay. Well, you're saying here, get involved in the political process.
Yeah, it's so easy, and if you don't do it, you can't complain.
And you're starting at very much a grassroots level.
Definitely. And that's the easiest way to get involved. So many grassroots efforts have brought such huge changes from the NAACP. They started out as very much a grassroots effort. Students for Democratic Society was a grassroots effort. There's no huge public funding at first, although we'd like it.
Let's meet someone else who's coming at grassroots. Or do you have something else to add?
No, I was just going to say thanks for your time. I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. We've got a great guest here tonight, and I definitely support him. He's got a great grassroots effort going on. So,
I was going to introduce him by saying we have someone else who's in politics from really a grassroots level and can tell us a little bit what it's like to actually be out on the streets and ringing doorbells. We have Mr. Mark McDavid, I'm sorry, a candidate for state representative. Good to have you with us tonight, Mr. McDavid.
Thank you.
Thank you. And which district seat are you a candidate for?
138, and that includes Garden Oaks, Oak Forest, Spring Branch, Bear Creek, and part of Shady Acres.
Okay. And how did you decide to get involved in active politics?
My wife and I like to talk about politics a lot. She's been involved in politics, and I grew up in the district, and things have changed over the years politically, and I feel like I should do something.
Okay.
Rather than just sit around and talk about it, just get out there and be a candidate and try to change things. Nobody else had even entered until the deadline.
Okay, and what do you mean by change things?
Well, we're represented by someone who doesn't have the interest of his constituents. And I guess the thing that just put me over the edge was on December the 26th, I picked up a copy of the Chronicle and found out that the state rep for 138 had voted against 5 clean air amendments. And this is Houston, Texas, home of the ship channel and filthy air. And everybody has to breathe air.
Yeah, and what do you think should be done about Houston's air?
Well, for one thing, the state of Texas needs to pick up the ball and run with it. They're not enforcing the laws. How sad is it that Bill White has to try to enforce the laws and has the suit against Valero for their...
Well, to some extent, we live in the city. He's the mayor of the city.
But
in some ways, isn't that a logical place?
But the state's dropping the ball. It's their job. And through the last few years, they haven't been doing the job.
They don't always have the public interest, best interest in mind. With Bay City being one of the highest cancer rates in the country, I mean, I think there should be some kind of change being done. And I think that's, one of the first ways is getting involved in the political process. totally right on that you do that. You said,
my brother worked at a plastics plant for several years, and as soon as Bush became governor, the pollution inspection stopped.
right.
And I know this for a fact.
They actually lowered EPA standards in order so that so many companies could be within their...
And my brother was telling me other stuff too, like methyl chloride was getting dumped on the ground, and nothing's being done about it.
Yeah.
Well, what is methyl chloride?
Well, it's my brother could tell you more than me, but it's an element of the plastics for production.
Well, are there other areas other than pollution that you're interested in?
Well, something that's upset me for years is the last few years of the state park funding in this state has dropped to 49th per capita in the United States. We're only ahead of Kansas.
Well,
and
that puts us more or less in the same place that we are with school finance, with medical care for the indigent. In 48th, 49th, 50th, about where Texas stands in funding almost everything.
It's sad because it doesn't have to be that way. We're the 10th, 11th biggest economy in the world, and it doesn't have to be. There was money earmarked for the state parks from the sporting good tax, and the money's been stripped away. They actually get about $12 million out of $85 million they should get.
And this tax was earmarked
for the state parks.
Now, do you know where that money is actually going?
It's gone into the general fund.
Okay.
Gee, so that's going to...
As an outdoorsman, it really upsets me. And what's really upsetting is that not everybody can afford to have a lake house or a beach house, and state parks and city parks and stuff like that are the only way an average family might be able to enjoy the outdoors.
Yeah, well, not only the outdoors. I recall reading recently in the Chronicle how far behind the battleship Texas was in being able to afford routine maintenance. I mean, the state parks are important elements of our society, and if we can't do routine maintenance on them, pretty soon they're not there.
Well, the Republicans have a theory that the state parks should pay for themselves, and there's no state in the United States where the state parks pay for themselves from entry fees. All the states realize it's in their economic interest to subsidize their state parks to some degree.
Yeah. Well, one thing I was thinking about, they're paying for them by user fees. How many school field trips go to the various state parks, and are we going to make school kids buy tickets to get in?
Well, there's several state parks right now that haven't even reopened because of Rita. And those school kids aren't going to go to those state parks for nature or history or anything.
I assume that means that the storm damage hasn't been cleared up either.
Well, actually, Lake Houston State Park was recently ceded to the city of Houston.
Right.
And Harris County, and there was another proposal to sell part of Big Bend Ranch State Park, but I think there was such a firestorm about it that they didn't do that.
Yeah. So, well, let's just keep going down the list. What beyond state parks and environment?
Well, everybody noticed that their insurance bills, doubled a few years ago?
Yeah. And
they're still going up, just not doubling every year. And you know, if your state rep and the state house is going to represent the insurance companies, and people should have a state rep that actually represents the people of their district, not the insurance companies.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is still fairly early in the campaign season, but I expect you're starting to get some response. How do people in your area seem to feel about these issues?
Well, one thing that I found out, a lot of people don't realize that the state rep voted against these clean air amendments. Mm-hmm. And it's even Republicans that I've talked to are upset about it. Mm-hmm. And we have, about 62 ozone warning days a year in this city, and they tell old people and young people, well, don't go outside and breathe air, and then the rest of us, what are we supposed to do? Yeah. We have to go to work.
Yeah, isn't Houston, second to L.A.?
Second to L.A.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just visualizing the kind of world where it's unhealthy to go outside. That's
You wouldn't need state parks then. That's horrible.
Perhaps that's the way to keep the rising cost of health care down, is just make the air poisonous enough to kill everyone off.
Well, so what have you been doing in order to further your campaign? Because we know you're in District 138. It's kind of out there in the suburbs and everything. How are you reaching your voters, and how are you, what's your campaign?
We've done some direct mail early in the primary season to Democratic voters, and we block walked a lot just to our base, which is the Democratic voters.
I believe we have a phone call. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Yes, Mr. McDavid. My name's Clayton. I live in Spring Branch, and I wanted to know, where do you stand on medical marijuana, and what do you plan to do to help us who need it? And I'm going to sit back and listen to your answers.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, it's proven beyond a doubt how medical marijuana helps people with nausea. It's got medical uses, and this country, marijuana was used until the 1930s.
Right.
I believe that I would vote for a bill. If it was introduced in the House, I would vote for a bill for medical marijuana use in the state.
Right on.
Okay, that's always encouraging for us to hear. We know that looking at presidential politics, that we're dealing in a world there of hundreds of millions of dollars, of media consultants, of polling like you wouldn't believe, of leased jet airplanes hopping all over the country. How are things different when you're campaigning at a local level and ringing your own doorbells?
For me, we don't have any of that kind of money. And I draw upon two different experiences in my life for this block walking, which we've done quite a bit of. I used to be in sales for a few years, so I enjoy talking to people. And I ran 13 Houston marathons, so I'm not afraid to get out there and walk for hours. So.
Especially in the summer heat.
Especially in the heat, exactly.
Yeah. That marathon training may be the best thing that you could do.
I'd actually compare running a marathon, training for a marathon, and running a campaign real similar. It's if you pay your dues, put in the hard work, you'll do well. Both of them are one-day events, and
yeah. And you said you've gotten a lot of responses from Republicans even that didn't know how Bohag had voted and how their representative had voted. What kind of responses have you been getting from people that you've actually been going door to door? Have you been getting a lot of positive responses, or gee, I didn't know that, or what kind of?
Yeah, a lot of people, like I say, they don't know. I just want at least people to know there's a choice.
Do you know how your district voted in the last presidential election?
The district breaks down about 60% Republican, 40% Democrat, but that was 2 years ago.
Right.
And we think it'll be a lot closer.
Local issues are not necessarily the same as national issues.
Well, you got state and local and then national issues, but...
So, well, what are your plans as the summer progresses and the fall gets closer?
Well, we're going to continue to block walk all summer, and we're going to continue to try and fundraise all summer, and then in the fall we'll do more block walking and some direct mail. We got to get the independent voters. That's where the real battle is. I believe just about all over the country you'll have 40% people vote Republican, 40% Democrat, and there's about 20 in the middle.
Okay. Who is your opponent in this race?
Dwayne Bohag.
Dwayne Bohag. Is he the incumbent now?
He's the incumbent. He's won twice, I believe.
Yeah, he's a pretty new representative. So I was wondering if people wanted to join your campaign, or if they wanted to help you out financially or volunteer-wise, how could they get a hold of you, I guess?
We've got a website.
And what's that website?
www.votemcdavid.
Yeah, .org or
.com.
.com, okay. Yeah, it's amazing how quickly the web has moved into politics. And
I'm encouraged every time we get a lot of hits. And a lot of times we get the hits after we block walk.
Yeah.
Or we'll get a volunteer for a sign, or we'll get some contributions.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's an easy way to follow up when some strange guy's at the door and he leaves and you want to see right then who is he. The web's there.
And word of mouth is a powerful thing, too. If I talk to somebody and they've got a positive impression, well, they're going to have neighbors and friends throughout the district and the city.
Yeah, they're going to talk over their fences and say, hey, we met this guy. We think, you know, he might be a good representative. So block walking and web campaigning is definitely a good way to go.
Well, over the past couple of legislative sessions, the big problem seems to have been school finance and taxes. We had those really disastrous special sessions last year. We had a special session this year that came up with some sort of patchwork solution. How well do you think the legislature worked its way through that problem?
I think it's a Band-Aid. And I think next year they'll be right at it again, trying to figure something out. They're going after people with bad habits. That's how they figured they were going to solve it up this time around. If you read through some of the fine print, there's really no property tax relief for this coming up year, very little.
Yeah. You mean you haven't already rushed out and spent that $2,000 that the governor says you'll get
Well,
back?
that's over 3 years. But they make it sound like it's coming to you this next year.
Well, one thing that struck me, you mentioned that they were basing this on people's bad habits. And they claim that this $1 a pack cigarette tax will raise all kinds of money. At the same time, they say that raising the price that much will make people stop smoking. It sounds to me like they've gotten themselves in a bit of a bind there, because if it makes people quit smoking, then it doesn't bring in all of that money they're counting on. Or if it does bring in all of that money, then no one has quit smoking, and all it's become is just another tax. Is politics something where you can play both sides of an answer like that?
That really is a tough issue to deal with. My grandfather died of lung cancer, and I wouldn't care if anybody in this country ever smoked again.
Right,
but they're going to.
Yeah.
People are going to drink beer. They're going to go to the liquor store. So you can tell people not to do stuff, and they're going to do it anyway.
Well, what I was getting at, though, is it's one thing, and it's probably a very good effort, to try to get people to stop or at least cut down on smoking. But you can't depend upon continued smoking as a steady source of revenue when you're using the same tax as a tool to drive smoking down. It looks to me like they should have kept the two efforts separate in one way or another.
I agree, and like I say, that's why I think it's sort of a Band-Aid. I think they'll have to come and address it the next couple of years.
Yeah, so you really want to get involved in that mess?
I felt an obligation to run because it was the deadline, and I had thought about it, and I was like, it's time to put up or shut up and try to do something about it.
Okay. That sounds kind of surprising that no one would even bother to file. It's about halfway through our hour. It's nearly time for us to take a small break, catch up on what's going on in the world, and after the break, we'll be back to continue with Mr. McDavid and whatever questions or responses you and our wider audience would care to make. So remember, the phone lines will be open after the break, and we will see you in about a minute.
It's time to play Name That Drug by its side effects. According to the BBC, this drug has no known side effects. The drug contains a molecule 10,000 times as active as glucose. It goes to the midbrain and makes those nerve cells fire as if you were full, but you have not eaten. Time's up. The answer, P57, Hoodia, from a Kalahari desert cactus, marketed by Pfizer. Look for the ads in your email.
Down with the Houston Media Short Show, Drugs, Crime, and Politics. What do you think about the drug war?
I think it's over. We lost it.
This week in drug war history, June 1st, 1996. Noted actor and hemp activist Woody Harrelson was arrested and charged with cultivation of less than 5 marijuana plants after he planted 4 industrial hemp seeds in full view of Lee County Sheriff William Kilburn in Lexington, Kentucky. June 3rd, 1876. At the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia, America's first 100-year birthday bash, fairgoers visit the Turkish Hashish Exposition and toke up in order to enhance their fair experience. June 8, 1993. William F. Buckley in an interview said, "The amount of money and of legal energy being given to prosecute hundreds of thousands of Americans who are caught with a few ounces of marijuana in their jeans simply makes no sense. The kindest way to put it. A sterner way to put it is that it is an outrage and imposition on basic civil liberties and on the reasonable expenditures of social energy." This is Steve Nolan for the Drug Truth Network.
One thing that strikes me is that the way you're going about this campaign, there doesn't seem to be a lot of money involved. I mean, it takes some, of course. But what do you see happens when you move a little higher up the scale and get into the national offices and money to campaign becomes an essential part of a politician's life? What does throwing all of that money into politics do to it?
I think you can become a puppet to whoever gave you the money, like you owe them a favor, and unfortunately that's a lot of what's going on now.
We were talking about how you were thinking that, you know, some of your main areas of expertise are outdoors. You've got the Clean Air and Environment Act, Water Acts, and how representatives, you know, they all represent an area, but do they really represent those people? You know, we should have like representatives that are kind of expertise in certain areas and everything. So how do you feel about that?
Well, the whole problem with this district is the eastern part of it, the way I see it, and the western part of it really don't have a whole heck of a lot in common. Mm-hmm. And it was gerrymandered, so a Republican could win, obviously, and I think it needs to, the east and the west ought to be in different districts completely.
Well, the redistricting has been, let's get this phone call first and then I'll ask that question. Hello, you're on the air.
Yes, my name is BJ, and I'm actually a former police officer in the state of Texas, and I got into an accident on my off-duty time, and for several years I was caught up in prescription painkillers, and I just want to say that the one true thing that's ever helped me and has been having to go to legal extremes to get marijuana to help me out with my pain. And the most addictive drug out there is the drugs that the doctors are prescribing. And I was wondering how you felt about that.
Okay, thank you, BJ. Marijuana has been recognized as a painkiller for a long time. The FDA has recently approved clinical studies on a marijuana-based painkiller. But on the other hand, in the hands of those that know how to use them well, the opioids are among the most effective and safest painkillers there are. One of the problems is that they're most often prescribed by general practitioners or orthopedic doctors who do not have the same full training in the long-term use of opioids that's necessary to manage them. The result is a lot of people do get messed up on prescription drugs.
That's true. They're some of the most addictive, and they are the most detrimental. A little clarification, the person who called in earlier about medical marijuana actually had their physician say, you can take all of these prescription drugs, but they're literally killing you. Yeah. They're killing your body, and it would be better for you if you were to take medical marijuana. So we do need physicians who are more trained in the detriment of long-term drug use.
From what I understand, a lot of these painkillers fry your liver.
Right.
The funny thing is, it's not the painkillers. And this is what, if we take the most common one, it's a mixture of hydrocodone, which is an opium derivative, and acetaminophen. The hydrocodone part of it is a very safe, effective painkiller, but the acetaminophen, which the law requires to be mixed in before you can sell it, does cause extensive liver damage. So it's the acetaminophen that's the killer in the mix. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Hello, Buford. I have a question for your guest. I was wondering what we can do about the inadequacies of the Harris County crime lab and the overcrowding at the Harris County Jail and the inadequacies in the exploding Texas prison population.
Okay, thank you.
Well, as far as the exploding Texas prison population, what they might need to do is a lot of the petty drug crimes, quit flooding our jails with people for the petty drug crimes.
Make it more of a ticket issue.
Keep the violent criminals in jail.
Right.
Oh, I did notice that, for instance, Harris County has a new drug rehab unit set up that should be going into operation soon. Now, on a national level, they just released that our prison jail population has reached an all-time high of 2.2 million people. That's 1 out of every 137 people in the country. That's a lot of people in prison. We're number 2 in the world to China right now. And that's something that a state legislator is going to have to deal with. 2 years ago, I believe it was, the Texas prisons cost something like $2 billion a year. So here where we're fighting to find money for schools, we're spending vast amounts for prisons. There's still some budget balancing to be done there if you get to Austin or when you get to Austin. How do you go about setting those priorities?
Well, we've got to keep violent criminals in jail. And when they had the ruling back in, the 1970s and the William Wayne Justice and all this stuff, and they started letting violent people out of jail, well, they found out they went out and committed more violent crimes. That's just not an option, letting violent people out of jail commit more crimes.
Okay. Let's see. What else?
Well, I mean, yeah, you said something about earlier nonviolent offenses, especially, drug crimes that are nonviolent offenses. How do you feel about the kind of revolving door system? Someone was talking about this earlier, about how pedophiles actually don't go to jail. They can actually get released even at their court date. They don't have any type of terms of sentencing. But then, nonviolent drug offenders, do automatically go to jail and everything. I think that's something that was just completely blew my mind recently hearing about that. And in fact, in Texas, a judge deemed there was one man who had molested some children or something or other, and she termed him too short to go to jail.
Oh, that wasn't in Texas.
It wasn't?
But here was a man that was convicted of a sexual assault on a minor. She was a girl, I think, of 14 or 15 years old, possibly 13. He had had sexual relations with her at least 2 or 3 times. No other criminal record at all. Now, the other side of the coin was this man was between 5 feet and 5 feet 1 inches tall. Sexual offenders notoriously get beaten up, assaulted, raped, killed when they go to prison. So here she was faced with 3 possibilities. Put him on probation, which is not a walk in the park in spite of what anyone says.
Right, it's not, but it's certainly not jail time
confinement to
for an offense
home
that you've done.
with meeting the probation officer, drug test, community service, fines. It's pretty onerous.
It racks up a little bit.
The second choice would be to send him to prison where odds are he would be dead within a month, or to send him to prison, put him directly into administrative segregation or solitary confinement, which practically any way you look at it would be cruel and unusual punishment. Now remember, the legislator in passing the law set the range of what would be acceptable sentences for the crime. And the legislature had included in that possible range probation. So the legislature in passing the law recognized that there would be cases of committing this crime in which jail time would not be the appropriate circumstances. Now, the judge in this case, looking at the entirety of the circumstances, an older girl, this was not pedophilia, this was paraphilia, hebephilia actually. A clean criminal record, no violence involved, no allegation that other children were abused. The extreme physical peril to the defendant of going to prison. Stacking all of these up, she said, I find the best solution within the limits set by the legislature is this kind of probation. Would I, as a judge reading the same record, have said the same thing? I don't know. Can I say she was wrong in saying that? No, I can't say she was wrong. Had she put him in jail, she would have literally been sentencing to death.
Well, this is one example. I just thought this was interesting that the sentencing was deemed too short. But one example of many where pedophiles don't get jail time, and that is an extremely egregious offense, and yet nonviolent criminals who are simply using in their own homes, smoking pot or something, or not even, hurting anyone else, and then they go to jail. I think this is an extremely discriminatory law, and I think, that should be changed. I don't think that nonviolent offenses, where it's not affecting anyone else, should have automatic jail time. And that's what it boils down to.
Does that include theft, hot check offenses, things like that are nonviolent?
No, it's obviously impinging upon someone else's personal property.
Well, part of what happened, and I'm not really sure what you're talking about, during George Bush's warm-ups for his current occupation, the legislature changed the state law requiring anyone convicted of a state jail drug felony to spend at least part of the time in jail. Probation would not be allowed. So at that time, drug offenses, mandatory prison time. The prisons, among other things, objected to it because they were getting so many. So the next legislature repealed that part of the act, saying that they were now entitled to probation. So the mandatory sentencing of state jail felonies is no longer part of the law. Hello, Speaker, you're on the air.
Hi, yes. Hold on, let me turn down.
Okay.
I'd like to know when you're going to are some other topics that you're going to bring up, like for CPS departments that are coming in and want to interfere in taking children from grandparents or put them in the system when they don't have to be put in the system? Also for like drug offenders that have had trouble with drugs and dealing with programs that are not totally cooperative or right to work with long-time drug offenders. And because I'm kind of with you when it comes to like kids as pedophile has done something to children or done something to a family that causes them to be in the system, and they don't want to lock him up. But if a person has a drug addiction or problems with drugs, first thing they want to do is lock them up and say, hey, you have violated your rights or you're killing your rights because you are a drug addict. And what are they're going to do about trying to clean up the streets in Texas or all over the world that have problems with drugs?
Okay, thank you. I would say we should take this call as a note to our producers, and that yes, it would be a great idea sometime soon to have a guest to talk about CPS, Child Protective Services, and particularly relationships between CPS and parents who use or have used or been accused of using drugs. I think that would be a subject I, for one, would like to explore in more depth. And frankly, I'll have to admit to the caller, I don't know enough about it to say much. Do you have any background on Child Protective Services or how they work, or is this something as new to you as it is to me?
That's a little bit new to me.
Okay.
But I do think that a child should be with its grandparents, if that's the last option for to be with a family member.
A recent law that was passed was under debate whether a mother should be, I guess, prosecuted twice for if she's, and back me up on this, but if she's using drugs or something, if she should be prosecuted twice for injury to the fetus or something. That was actually negated because that would, in effect, probably prevent a lot of women from going and seeking the medical attention that they need, because they would basically be, charged twice for a crime or charged at all.
Well, 20 years ago, back when the bogus cocaine baby scare hit the country, there were several cases of zealous prosecutors that tried to convict mothers of felony delivery of a controlled substance because they had it in their bloodstream while they were pregnant. But most of those died out. Occasionally you'll see an overzealous prosecutor around again. We have another phone call. Caller, you're on the air.
Yes, sir. I have actually a comment about what the host of your show just made as far as injury to a child being turned down twice as a bill of law. And, I just don't see what those guys don't see, that any female that's doing any type of narcotic, whether it be abusing alcohol or abusing an illegal drug, would not be held accountable for putting these substances into the body to where, in effect, it would affect the child in one way or another. And I was just wondering if she knew more in depth as to why the law was passed down, because that is, in effect, injury to a child, to where you're putting intoxicants into your body to where it affects the outcome of the fetus in a 9-month period.
Does that also include overly fat hamburgers, candy bars with lots of sugar, failure to exercise on the mother's part, and a lot of this argument? Now, granted, excessive alcohol during the first part of pregnancy clearly has been shown to cause fetal damage. Excessive use of opiates during pregnancy can cause a baby to go through a brief withdrawal period. Cigarettes have shown some connection to premature birth and sudden infant death, but the relationships between most drugs and babies' health or development is a whole lot more tenuous than most of us think. And the counter side to that is, how close do we want to be to the Stepford Wives, in which we keep all pregnant women or women who might become pregnant in dormitories so that we can watch everything they eat or drink or make them exercise on schedule? That sounds dangerously like concentration camps to me. Now, I'll get an argument out of somebody on that.
Well, no, but I mean, you were absolutely right on. To what extent do we, just moderate? Well, does smoking one cigarette, is that, should that be an offense to the woman? Because it could possibly be detrimental, but maybe eating too much or not exercising enough as well. So let's take another call.
Caller, you're on the air.
Hi, I'm the lady that brought the topic up about the CPS department. And
right.
Women.
Yes.
Okay. My dilemma with the problem with this is that I don't think it's right for any parent or any mother that is pregnant with children to do substance abuse. But the whole thing, what I'm facing here in Texas is that I'm a grandmother of a daughter that is drug addiction. And when I have called the hotline for CPS to come in and to intervene into protecting the children while she was in a situation at the time, there was no action done. I'm dealing with a case I'm dealing with a case now that where I'm trying to keep them out of my life because I know how they, excuse me, the baby's calling, how they keep you tied up in their system with your children. Okay, I'm trying to get temporary guardianship of my children, my grandchildren. Due to the fact that my daughter is on drugs and can't be found right now, I'm having a hard time getting anyone in Texas to even look at my case or look at my story.
Do you have a law?
This grandmother has a right to have her children,
excuse me, ma'am,
her grandchildren with her, but because the mother did not give me any notice that I can have the children, CPS feels that they need to come in and protect the children from the mother. Now, the mother left.
Do you have a lawyer representing you now?
No.
This is the kind of situation that you really need a private lawyer to go forward and present your case. If you don't have one or no one, the Houston Bar Association has an excellent lawyer referral service that will help you find someone that can work on a case like this for you. This is certainly not the kind of thing that you can really do on yourself. It's a very, very serious problem, but it's one that you need the professional help of a good lawyer on. The Houston Bar Association Lawyer Referral Service, I don't have their phone number right now, but that's where you need to go.
Okay.
But without a lawyer, your chances of success
I'm looking for your service to come up. So there's other grandmothers and other parents that are probably in some of the same dilemma.
And as I said earlier,
more of an open so we can find other ways to do this.
Yeah, as I told you earlier, I think that this is an excellent subject for a later program, and we will be, I'm sure, diligently looking for a guest that can take care of this. Well, we're down to about 5 minutes. Do you have a short version of what you would like to tell people about who you are and what you want to do for them before we close?
Sounds like we got a call.
Okay. We'll see if we probably got another call.
Well, I'll tell you a little bit about a grassroots campaign I was involved in 16, 17 years ago. Mitsubishi Corporation was going to open up a copper smelter on Galveston Bay.
Yeah.
And enough fishermen and conservationists raised hell about it.
Yeah.
And I was part of the grassroots effort. I wrote letters
and you blocked it?
And there's no Mitsubishi copper smelter on Galveston Bay.
Congratulations.
Caller, you're on the air.
Yes, this is BJ again, and I'm the ex-police officer that called earlier.
Yes.
And I just wanted to applaud your efforts and, bringing up this issue. One more thing I wanted to add about the painkillers that I was on is I was on those for 3 years and had elevated liver enzymes. And I lost about 30 pounds. And, when I found that marijuana could relieve those symptoms, I've actually put on anywhere between 10 to 15 pounds, gotten my liver enzymes back down, and it's become, a really wonderful thing for someone that's in pain, and that I can walk through life now, without that horror of waking up in pain every day that a lot of the people in Congress don't understand.
Sounds like we need to sign you up for an endorsement contract here.
She sounds like she'd be a perfect candidate. If you'd like to contact Bayou City Compassion, we go to legislators' offices and try to talk to them on behalf of medical marijuana and issues.
Congratulations on coming through what sounds like a really horrible stretch of your life, BJ. Thank you for calling. Okay, so...
But getting back to the campaign, I believe grassroots can work. Mm-hmm. And if I can find more people to work hard, we'll win.
It sounds like that you're showing grassroots can work, because the telephone has really been jumping off the table tonight. So apparently, one way or another, you know how to stir people up and get them interested.
I can't wait to wake up Saturday morning at 7 a.m. and start block walking.
Well,
start hanging door hangers.
Right.
Sounds like people are ready for more options. But they'll knock at my door at 7 in the morning.
Yeah.
Well, that early, I'm putting door hangers out. Later on in the morning.
I was going to say, be careful. This is Texas. At 7 in the morning, you might be greeted with a shopping.
It's later on in the morning we actually knock on the doors and talk to people, but we have to cover ground. We got a lot of ground. There's 150,000 people that live in the district.
Oh, wow.
We've got to get out there, get some name recognition.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think one thing that still surprises me, 158,000 people is almost as large as the city I grew up in, Lubbock. And here it's just a small speck in a great big pond of Houston. It's a slightly different thing.
And I've almost run into nobody in the district that knows that my opponent is named on the Tom DeLay indictment. He's not actually indicted, but his name is on one of Tom DeLay's indictments. So how sad is that? He's been able to keep his head above the fray on this.
Under the radar, definitely.
But he's right there on it.
Yeah.
So
scary.
Well, that might make a difference before things go along. We've got just a couple of minutes. Mindy, you want to add anything?
Just like I said, I'm so glad that we got to touch on the topic of medical marijuana briefly. If anyone would like to find more information or get more involved contacting your legislators, BayouCityCompassion.org is the website to go to. It's all one word, no spaces. Students for Sensible Drug Policy recently had a bill that is going to make student searches, this is a topic I wish we had gotten onto, student searches in schools easier to get to, which is unfortunate. Obvious violation of your Fourth Amendment rights.
Well, we're about out of time. I think everyone tonight has seen how close to home politics can start, and that if you want to make changes, it's important that you get involved. Having you call us on the phone is wonderful. Having you call your representative, your congressman, your senator is effective. So be wonderful and call us, but be effective and call those who can make the changes you want, and vote for those who you think will represent your interests, and not those necessarily with the prettiest campaign ads. So here we are at the end of another program. We'll be back in 2 weeks with more drugs, crime, and politics. Thank you.
Present policy of drug prohibition is hopeless. It is hopeless. It will never get better. Literally, victory today is being defined as slowing down the pace of defeat.
We ought to listen to science and medicine when it comes to whether marijuana or any other substance has a medical benefit.
The fact that marijuana is a less dangerous drug.
We're
going full-blown into a program that has failed and failed every other time we've tried it. Please point out one success in 30 years of an eradication program that has stopped drugs from coming in this country. Point out one success, because I've reviewed that research years ago.
The World Health Organization is removing Taiwan from its list of areas of recent local transmission of SARS.
On March 8, 2003, Taiwan in the Asia-Pacific region reported its first suspected case of SARS. The suspected carrier of the virus, who infected a successive number of victims, was a traveler from China. As the list of suspected cases was lengthening and the number of reported patients began to mount, people came to realize that SARS was and is a serious menace to public health. SARS is a new infectious disease, and because global health authorities were ignorant about its origin, word of mouth began to stoke widespread fear among the people within a short period of time. Fortunately, the National Taiwan University Hospital took appropriate measures immediately after receiving its first suspected case of SARS.
台大医院是在3月14号秦姓台商的太太到我们急诊处以后，我们发现有一位先生、一位太太先后得到肺炎。当时我们就注意到是不是先生的肺炎致病细菌会传染给太太，所以我们当天立刻就把秦姓台商夫妻2个人分别安排到隔离病房里面去被隔离开来。接着，因为有媒体的报道，香港、越南都有肺炎的流行状况，所以在当天傍晚，我们开了一个紧急感控会议以后，我们就很快的把我们的防疫的体系提升到最高等级，也就是所谓的生物防护等级的第3等级的防护措施，把它们非常严密的隔离开来，避免造成病原菌的散播。
The new mysterious disease was known as atypical pneumonia when it first appeared and was later renamed severe acute respiratory syndrome, or SARS. The SARS coronavirus belongs to the RNA group, which is known for their adaptability. As a result, a typical human's immunity system has a limited ability to fight this new virus, and infection is virtually assured once the virus contacts the body. Once in the body, the virus generates an excessive amount of mucus, which can cause difficulty breathing. The virus is speedily transmitted through the carrier's airborne droplets generated by coughing and sneezing.
它在这个对人的感